Welcome back. We are exploring the issues surrounding Amendment 4, and joining me now to speak out against the amendment is Dr. Grazie Christie, a radiologist and senior fellow for the Catholic Association. Dr. Christie, thank you for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
I want to start by, I asked you to join us in the studio so that you could see the short film that we just did about that young woman. What would you respond? What would you say to that young woman who feels as if she's being punished because she has to leave the state because she didn't even realize she was pregnant until she was 8 weeks along?
You know, I'm really glad that I came in a little early and I watched that whole package, and it was very affecting and very moving. But what moved me the most was this terrible, everybody, the mother, the daughter, you were so sad that she had to travel. What was really sad is that she accepts as her lot that she's going to be having abortions because people are, the way that our society is set up, she's going to be picking up the pieces and she's going to be having abortions. And everybody was so sad about traveling to DC, but the actual terrible sadness is that girls are going through this at all, that they're having abortions. And it sounded like she learned a lot in the procedure. She didn't seem to learn that this is not the kind of lifestyle that is conducive to health and happiness, a lifestyle of having to have abortions periodically.
Well, I don't know that she wants to have abortions on a regular basis. I mean, I think this was an incident in which she didn't realize she became pregnant and that. But would you say that she should have then carried the child to term?
That's what made me sad watching this, because the focus seemed all on this flight to Washington, right? Which, yeah, it complicates matters. This is what I would say. I'm glad that you showed this because it shows how deeply undemocratic Amendment 4 is. If people feel that 6 weeks is too short for a mother to decide to abort her child, it's too short a period, she needs longer, then that's something that we can work on, that the people of Florida, voters in Florida, can work on through the legislative process. And they can say, well, maybe 10 weeks is better, or 8 weeks, or 9 weeks. But Amendment 4 puts everything away from the voter and makes elective abortion legal through all 40 weeks of pregnancy. And let me say, you were very illustrative when you showed the calendar. And it's true. A woman who is 6 weeks pregnant conceived 3 weeks earlier. Okay? No, actually, I'm sorry, 4 weeks. 4 weeks earlier. And pregnancy tests today are extremely, extremely sensitive. A woman can know she's pregnant 3 weeks into that period, right? If
she thinks of it. Again, this young woman did not believe that she was. She actually thought she had a period. She had bleeding and spotting. And so, but again.
Let me give you my suggestion. We live in a state right now where elective abortion is legal for any reason through the first 6 weeks of pregnancy. If a young woman, if a woman is sure that she does not want to give birth to her child, that she wants to abort her child, or that she feels pretty strongly that that is something she would consider, I would suggest have a pregnancy test quite often. If you are sexually active and you think you could get pregnant, then have a pregnancy test if you are sure you don't want to travel to DC, because they cost 97 cents at Walmart, and you have 3 weeks.
So your idea is just women should just every month just take a pregnancy test?
They can take one every week for 97 cents, for instance, if they don't want to travel to DC.
So let's go back to Amendment 4. So you said something before about how this would, and I've heard you talk before about how this would allow pregnancy or abortions through, what was it?
The entire pregnancy.
Yeah, that's not true.
It is true.
No, it's really not.
It is really true.
Yeah.
It's true, sir.
Tell me why you believe so.
It's not why I believe, it is true, because the law as it states itself, the amendment says, no law shall be passed in Florida that will restrict, delay, or prohibit abortion through viability or thereafter for the mother's health. Because of the way it's phrased, no law is allowed in Florida after viability, which is 23 or 24 weeks, if it interferes with the mother's health, but the mother's health is not defined. The mother's health has been proven by Supreme Court cases in the United States to mean not just physical health, but her emotional health, her social health, her economic health, and that is how it would be interpreted. So Florida would become a mecca.
By the way, who would interpret that? When you say when you say it would be interpreted, and by the way, the actual amendment says no law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability or when necessary to protect the patient's health, as determined by the patient's healthcare provider.
Right. The healthcare provider is not a doctor necessarily. It's undefined. The mother's health is undefined, and it has been proven in prior cases and under Roe v. Wade, for instance, that mother's health is not her physical health, just her physical health.
So, but when you say, but again, you go back to the idea of like who will be deciding this? As I understand it, these are questions that may very well get raised, but will be decided by the Florida Supreme Court, because it will be up to the Florida Supreme Court to interpret the constitutional amendment. This is a very conservative court. Do you honestly believe that the Florida Supreme Court is going to allow abortion up through the 7th, 8th, or 9th month?
The Supreme Court can only do what's constitutional, correct? If you put an amendment on the Constitution and the amendment says that no law can stand, then no law can stand. That's what it means. It's a self-executing amendment. It's a self-executing law.
There is nobody on the side of who is supporting this that has claimed that this is going to be, they say up until viability. It's no different than what it was up under Roe.
Of course they're denying this. They're lying. I got a notice, say yes on, I got a flyer to my house delivered yesterday, say yes on 4. And on the other side it said that in Florida there are no exceptions for rape or incest or health of the mother. That is a patent lie. The people who are supporting this amendment are lying right and left like rugs.
So you talk also about parental consent and the issue of parental notification. And this was an interest. So explain to me your concern as it relates to that in the amendment.
Right now in Florida, for a minor girl, say a 12-year-old girl who's being abused or trafficked, for her to have an abortion, her parents have to be present, or her mother or her father, or she has to have a notarized letter. It's the same thing that we have in Florida for body piercing and for tattoos. Why? Because a child, a minor girl, ought to have her parents involved or her guardians.
And that's going to be the case after this amendment passes.
But it's not.
But it is.
But it's not.
So why do you believe it's not?
Because the amendment preserves parental notification. Parental notification is not the same thing as consent.
Do you know why it says?
I do know why.
Because I looked at this.
I know exactly why.
You know what? So the reason why it says parental notification, and I had to understand this. You're not an attorney.
Complicated.
Well,
it's very complicated.
It's actually not as complicated. You say parental notification because this was an amendment that was drafted, and there is already parental notification in the Florida Constitution. So in the Florida Constitution, it already describes parental notification. By putting the ballot language this way, which says the amendment does not change the legislature's constitutional authority to require notification to a parent or guardian before a minor has an abortion, what they're making clear is that this amendment of the Constitution will not change anything in the other amendment inside the Constitution. It lets parental consent laws remain in effect.
No,
it does.
It does not. You're wrong. You're wrong, and I'll tell you why. Parental notification is not the same as consent.
You're absolutely right. It's different. But there is you cannot have two issues in the constitutional amendment at the same time. You couldn't have an amendment that says parental consent as well as the abortion issue, because that's a separate issue. And it's already in statute. The legislature will enact this. They are allowed to have parental consent, and that will remain.
The first part of the amendment nullifies the consent, not the notification. And I'll tell you exactly why. For a child to come to the Planned Parenthood, these women that you show being so kind and beautiful on in your package, for a child to come to Planned Parenthood and to require consent from her parents is a delay and is a restriction on abortion. What's going to happen, I can assure you, is that these kind women at Planned Parenthood are going to have her fill out a postcard, and they're going to mail a postcard or send an email to her parents after the fact, or to whatever she fills out. So it is unconscionable that in the state of Florida,
you're making that, but there is no. Where are you getting that from? How
the
are you?
The amendment is very specifically written to be vague, so that all of these things are able to be done later after the amendment.
Let's take a quick commercial, and then we'll come back and continue to talk. All right, we'll continue our conversation after the break. Welcome back. We are joined again by Dr. Christie, who opposes Amendment 4. We've been having a spirited discussion. I want to sort of take a step back, because I think this goes to the larger issue of, I know that you come at this from also an issue of faith. You believe life begins at conception.
I do, but this is not an issue of faith for me. This is about women and girls in Florida and the kind of care that they deserve. And having unregulated abortion in Florida is a disaster for Floridian girls and women, not to mention the babies, but
you argue
the women and the girls.
You argue that the problem with the amendment, I've heard you talk about how nothing is defined.
Right.
In fact, everything is defined, not in the amendment, but in statute. Viability is defined. Florida statute, I can say, Florida's Title 29, Chapter 390 of the Florida statute defines viability means the stage of fetal development when life of a fetus is sustainable outside the womb through standard medical measures. That will not be altered by this amendment. When the Supreme Court decides how to view this amendment, they will go to the state statute that defines viability, and that's the standard that they'll use.
Does it say what week? Does it say what week is viability?
At the stage of development when life of a fetus is sustainable outside the womb through standard medical measures.
Right, it's not defined as a week.
Because science changes.
Right, science changes.
Isn't that a wonderful thing? There may come a point where where a fetus is able to be sustained outside the womb at 20 weeks or 18 weeks.
According to the amendment, the viability line means nothing because the next phrase of the sentence says, or after viability, if necessary for the mother's health, according to her health provider. The mother's health is not defined. It can mean her social, emotional, and economic health.
Well, this is an interesting. This is an interesting thing that
This is how you get to elective abortion for 40 weeks. Which is the mecca that Planned Parenthood and other big abortion want in Florida. Do you think that people who come to Florida to perform abortions, second and third trimester abortions, which are brutal, in which the baby can
which
feel
are rare,
pain, they're not rare enough. And they're elective. Did you know the vast majority of late-term abortions are elective? According to Guttmacher, not according to me.
So let me ask you this. Do you think that a woman just wakes up one day, 7 months into her pregnancy, 8 months into her pregnancy, and says, the hell with it. I'm going to go down and get me an abortion? You
know, you say that in a very dark way, but according to Guttmacher, which is the abortion industry's statistics and public policy guru, according to Guttmacher, the reason women get late-term abortions is exactly the same reason they get early abortions. For the father's not around, I have economic problems, I'm not ready to have a baby. And
that's a really dark view of women.
Look it up on Guttmacher. So I didn't say it. No. And let me finish saying another thing. The reason that they give the most is I didn't get around to it. And if you make elective abortion legal in Florida in the second and third trimester, which is what this amendment would do, then girls and women, instead of having an abortion in the first 6 weeks when it's safer for them and not so traumatic and brutal, they'll be having them in the second and third trimester. The
legislature will define the enacting legislation, and the state Supreme Court, which is very conservative, all DeSantis appointees will decide it. I want to play for you a piece of sound that you gave. You spoke at the March for Life in 2015. I want to play that's what you said then, and let's talk about it afterwards.
Children are choices, commodities, and those that are deemed defective are being eradicated before birth. When I examine a baby in utero and I suspect Down syndrome, my heart breaks because 9 times out of 10, this is a death sentence. The mother and father will never know the delight that God prepared for them when He created their son or their daughter. Instead, the life of a baby that is typically well over 20 weeks old will end in violence and pain.
You talk about how this in 2015, this was before Roe was overturned, how a terrible situation we are because, as you said, children are choices and commodities. And you talk about how it breaks your heart when you see that.
Because they're my patients.
Do you imagine, but I would imagine what you feel compares to nothing to what those parents feel when you give them the news that the child has Down syndrome. Do you think that's an easy decision for them to decide to terminate that pregnancy?
It's not an easy decision, but I'll tell you something else.
But do you want to make it for them?
To be disabled, first of all, you can abort in Florida till 15 weeks for fetal disability, right now legally, okay? Another thing is, it is unconscionable in our society that to be disabled is a death sentence. And that's what happens with with this idea that you test all the babies before they're born.
But you want to, so you want to make the decision for the parents?
I'm not making the decision for anybody. I'm standing up for patients, for my little patients, some of whom have defects and are deformed, and are disabled. I have seen parents abort a baby for a cleft lip. I have seen parents abort because it's the wrong sex, because they wanted a girl and not a boy. I wish these things weren't true. I wish people love their children from the very beginning, and sometimes they don't, and I'm very sad for that. But Amendment 4 is wrong, because Amendment 4 allows elective abortion through birth in Florida.
Through birth?
Through birth.
Yeah, okay. Dr. Christie, I appreciate your coming in. I really do appreciate your time, and thank you very much.
It was a real pleasure to talk to you.
All right, take care. We'll be right back after the break.